Hey guys, it's Chris with Braille and today I figure we can go ahead and build a diorama from the bottom up. Start with the base itself before we even get to the groundwork. By the end of the video, we will get into the groundwork a little bit, but with this old example here, you can see how I started with a wooden plaque. Some people use picture frames, kind of the same concept. You add the foam to the top, but you still wind up with this little decorative finish. So the display looks like it's kind of floating above it. But if it's pre-made, then you're either limited in space or you have way too much space. There really is no way to customize it. And I like that, but right now what I've kind of transitioned to is building up my own base with foam and balsa wood borders, and I think it gives it a lot of weight. It's got a lot of height and depth, and you can really do a lot to kind of create your own kind of custom space depending on the size of the layout that you want. Also, on the previous base, I used the classic sculptamold, which I had always stuck with. I've also tried wood putty in the past, but recently I've discovered this new product, which I used not only on this larger diorama, but these two 1/72 scale dioramas, and it's a drywall compound. So we'll get into that here in a minute. But what you can see here is, I think, just a great example of how much more dynamic you can really make that groundwork stand out, even from the base perspective right off the bat. And I think you have a lot more chance to customize it. Even on this one, where I didn't use balsa wood on the side, you can see the different, I tried to represent the different sedimentary layers of earth just to give it some kind of natural depth. I was inspired by the actual scrap piece of 3/4 inch plywood. Normally I just use a 1/4 inch, but I had some lying around and I got a nice sedimentary look, but this is all 1/4 inch. And speaking of 1/4 inch, here you can see really the process. So I get however thick the foam is, it doesn't really matter as long as it's easy to cut, but I get the foam and I glue it down onto at least a 1/4 inch worth of plywood just to give it something solid to sit on. You can mark along the side where you want to cut into the foam. I'm using a extending razor blade right now just to keep it simple and show the process, but I do prefer a hot wire cutter. I understand that not everyone has a hot wire cutter, so I'm not trying to say you need one, but I just find that it's a little faster and a little less of a mess to clean up after the fact. That being said, it does produce some significant odors, which I'm sure are incredibly toxic, so I definitely do it outside, and I have my respirator on. Cutting the foam itself is pretty straightforward, again, whether you use the knife or the hot wire cutter, but it is nice to have an idea of what you want to do ahead of time. And even if halfway through the process the foam kind of jumps out at you and something happened that inspires you to kind of change your groundwork a little bit, that's perfectly fine. You can always adapt it, even gluing extra pieces of foam on top, just to help raise the height. It is important to cut away from yourself too, especially if you're using a very sharp blade to get through the foam. I've definitely cut myself plenty of times, and most of them were for mistakes that I shouldn't have made if I had been practicing proper safe knife handling techniques. And while the plastic foam fumes are toxic, I think it probably is safer for your hands, at least, assuming you don't get melted plastic on them, to use the hot wire foam cutter. The one I have is not fancy by any means. I think I got it on Amazon for maybe $20. It was probably less. So you may notice the other bases in the background that I haven't started to cut yet, and I've actually gotten through most of the process on about 8 different bases. They're all pretty small. They're really just more test bases or examples for YouTube, for you guys. But it's taken me so long just to get through this process, and I realize I already have, almost 20 minutes of footage just for doing this one base. So I've decided to take it only so far today, to get it uploaded, just to get something out there, because it's been about a month since I've uploaded anything. And going forward, if anybody wants to see a specific type of groundwork, let me know and I'll focus on that video next. Like I said, I've got 8 different bases in the works. So let me know in the comments below if you guys want to see snowy, rocky texture like that Panzer IV, a deep woods or jungle kind of a base. I've got one that I think I want to do more of a kind of old growth forest with maybe a little stream in it. I've got one with a dirt road, maybe like a meadowy kind of area. You can actually see me working on that one now, and the dirt road is probably apparent. I've got a desert base. I'm just a muddy, muck kind of a base, and then a beach. Last but not least, planning on doing an urban scene as well. So at this point in the process, once I've got the base cut out and I understand the different heights and elevation, I add the 1/4 inch balsa wood to the sides. Now this is different from the 1/4 inch plywood. The plywood, I believe, is like a basswood. It's a lot more durable. The reason I add it on after I've cut the foam is typically, again, because I'm using a hot wire foam cutter. It would prevent me from cutting the balsa wood, but if you are using a knife, you probably can glue the balsa wood onto the side of the foam first, and then assuming your glue isn't too heavy duty, cut through the whole thing, the glue, the balsa wood all at once. Anyway, here is the product that I really think has changed the way I build dioramas going forward. It's an acrylic-based, lightweight drywall spackling compound that's pre-mixed, fast drying, and it doesn't shrink or crack. And I mean, even if you overload it with water to help smooth it out, I haven't seen it crack or shrink yet. Because it's acrylic based, and you can check on the back, it says clean up tools with water. But you can add acrylic paint, probably not too much, but you can add at least a little bit of paint to help tone it if you want to. It's already pre-mixed. You can add color to it. You can use it just right out of the bucket, and it looks just like snow. In fact, that's what my Panzer IV diorama I showed you earlier, all that groundwork is all this drywall spackling. It takes paint after the fact perfectly fine. You don't have to prime it. You can just go right in with whatever color you want. Again, because I think it's an acrylic-based patch and prime product that doesn't normally require even professional painters to do any priming, apparently, if they wanted to use it to patch a wall. So the consistency, it's a lot like a cake frosting kind of consistency. You can apply it just blobbed on with your hands like this, or in small little batches with a brush. And again, because it's an acrylic based that takes paint so well, and it's designed for the wall. For example, if someone goes to patch a hole in the wall and they don't quite get the whole patch all the way through, it would be a shame if to add a second layer required a whole lot of extra effort. So if you have to build up multiple layers of this, it adheres to itself equally well. So with the Panzer IV diorama, once I got the major groundwork set, I came in after the fact multiple times just to add footprints, to add little details, and it's all seamless. You just blend it together with a little bit of water, and you can really build up a lot of different effects. Because it takes 30 minutes to dry, it's fairly quick, but at the same time you can do a lot in 30 minutes. You can add in a whole lot of groundwork, whether it's static grass or forest floor, leaf litter, or sand, dried products, dried leaves, paper products like the little laser cut leaves. There's really a lot of different things you can do while it's still wet. I've pushed in actual rocks. I'll show you that here in a minute. But once I get the majority of it on, you can see I just use a little bit of tap water and an older kind of large brush just to help apply that water in there and smooth everything out. You don't necessarily need it overly smooth depending on what it is that you're doing, but you do want it to be all blended into one kind of cohesive, homogeneous form. Something to think about while you're doing this is how natural earth is eroded by water, and so it's nice to be able to use water to replicate these effects. So now I'm going to start adding in some more texture. This is just regular play sand. You know, you can use real earth, sand, or any kind of other textures that you might want, just depending again on the base. There is a little bit of texture already, like I mentioned in the spackling compound itself. But to keep building those layers, this helps. The spackling compound stays wet for maybe up to 30 minutes, maybe not that long, just depends on your conditions. But you can add different layers and then get that wet brush again to help blend them in together and push them down into the spackling so that they really lock in place. Throughout this whole process, I'll add in a lot of different material, and although you could add some water-based, white glue or something like that to the mix, there really isn't a need. I do try to keep my workspace as clean as possible, especially when dealing with a lot of these different materials like the sand. So I'll vacuum my desk up, which is definitely my dog's favorite part. Our youngest, Simba, who's also the biggest, is terrified of all things vacuums and loud noises. So he probably looks like that on the couch. Just kidding. He's pretty brave, I guess, because he always charges right into the room and starts barking up a storm. And yeah, our youngest, Avery, though, doesn't seem to mind too much. He's pretty chill, but definitely the one in charge. So if anything, he'll come barking at Simba to stop barking. Try and protect me or maybe the vacuum. I don't know. But anyway, after vacuuming up the sand and cleaning up the desk a little bit, the drywall spackling is still wet. So let's open up the collection of real rocks and twigs and whatever I got in here, and I'll try my best not to block the camera completely as I press in 3 or 4 of these rocks. I think you get the idea, nothing really scientific there. The next bin I've got is leaf litter, and it really is actual preserved leaves that have been, ground up and dried up and ran through a blender with some little plants and sticks and roots and whatever else to give this kind of a very realistic mess of forest floor material. This one happens to be made by the Scenic Factory. It was purchased, but you can certainly make some yourself if you have a spare blender. And it's fairly simple to preserve leaves so they don't continue to deteriorate over time. You just soak them in glycerin, which you can purchase from most drugstores. The next bag of goodies is root material that I collected from the front yard. And this is not actually preserved. This is just straight out of the ground, so I'm not too confident that this will last forever and ever. But for a little a test run of a base, I think this is perfectly fine. And again, just like the leaf material, if you soak all this stuff in some glycerin for however many days or weeks or whatever they recommend, it's an interesting process that I'd like to look into more, because I think you wind up mixing the glycerin and water, boil it, add in all your natural material, and then you just continue to add water if it evaporates over the course of that time. And you can add food coloring, so you can dye leaves so they stay green, depending on what you want to do. But anyway, the ultimate benefit is that they don't become brittle and fall apart and deteriorate. They stay pliable and almost plastic, I guess, kind of waxy. I've done it with leaves in the past, but yeah, I'm not sure if I followed the right directions or if I just soaked it in pure glycerin for a couple days and called it good. Basically, I pressed the root material into the spackling compound so that it is well secured by the time that the compound dries, and I really do my best to try to make a big tangled mess of all the root material now, because it will help during the next few stages when I have to add in the additional flocking and the static grass and the trees and more branches. It just gives it more purchase to kind of tangle everything up and keep it locked down, and the more random and chaotic it looks, I think the more natural it winds up turning out. But that's as far as I'm getting for today. So the next step is going to be painting, and it doesn't necessarily have to be this base that I'll paint for the next video in this series. If you guys want to see a different little base that I'm working on, this one could probably be that either old growth forest or maybe like a dense jungle, just depending on which way I go with it. But if you've got something else you want to see that's not jungle or wooded terrain, if you want to see a beach, if you want to see a desert, if you want to see more of the snow that I created, just let me know in the comments, guys. Thanks.